2 letters, 3 characters, 1 clue that might crack the entire Nancy Guthrie case wide open. USD. That is what the ransom note said. Not dollars, not $4 million. The note demanded payment in US dollars. And when Briana Whitney, the Arizona reporter who has been tracking this case since day one, read those 3 letters aloud on the Crime Junkie podcast on July 22nd, she stopped, she paused. And then she said something that has been echoing through every expert analysis since. Typically, if you're from here, you don't say that. 7 words, and every single one of them matters. Think about the last time you wrote about money. If someone owes you $500, you write $500. If you are splitting a bill with a friend, you say $20. If you are negotiating a business deal, you say $1 million. You never write USD. You never specify the currency code because you do not need to. You are in America. The default is dollars. Everyone knows what dollars are. You do not clarify because there is nothing to clarify. USD is what you write when you are operating across borders. It is what you type into a banking portal when you are converting from euros or pesos or yen. It is what you use when you need to distinguish American dollars from Canadian dollars or Australian dollars. It is the language of international finance. It is the habit of someone who thinks in multiple currencies and needs to specify which one they mean. It is not the habit of a kidnapper in Tucson, Arizona. And that is where this case turns from a story about a missing woman into something far stranger. Because the same person who wrote USD in the ransom note also knew things about the inside of Nancy Guthrie's home that nobody outside that house should have known. But before we get to that paradox, let us stay with the language. Because the USD detail is not the only linguistic fingerprint buried in these notes. The second ransom note, the one that arrived later, contains a phrase that stopped Whitney just as hard. Buried in nature now. Buried in nature. Read that back to yourself. When was the last time you heard an American English speaker describe a burial that way? You would say buried in the woods. You would say buried out in the desert. You would say buried somewhere remote. You would say almost anything except buried in nature. That phrase has a translated quality to it. It feels like someone took words from another language and ran them through a tool that gave them the closest English equivalent without giving them the natural English idiom. It is literal. It is slightly off. It is the kind of phrasing you get when someone is thinking in one language and writing in another. And there is another line. We did not fully grasp the seriousness of her physical conditions. Her physical conditions, not her medical condition, not her health, not her injuries, her physical conditions. That phrasing is formal in a way that American English rarely is. It sounds like a translated document. It sounds like a press release from a foreign ministry. It does not sound like someone standing in the Arizona desert writing a note about a woman they took from her home. Whitney flagged all of this, the USD, the buried in nature, the physical conditions. She raised the possibility that the author's first language is not English, or that the author used a translation tool to write the notes. Either possibility reshapes the investigation completely, because here is where the ground starts to shift under your feet. The person who wrote those words, the person who used USD instead of dollars, who wrote buried in nature instead of buried in the woods, that same person knew that a white smartwatch was lying on the floor near Nancy Guthrie's bed. They knew that a floodlight in Nancy's backyard had been destroyed. They knew the layout of her home. They knew what was on the floor. They knew what was broken in the yard. These are not details you pull from a news article. These are not details you guess. A white smartwatch on the floor near a bed. That is something you see when you are standing in the room. A destroyed floodlight in the backyard. That is something you notice when you walk through the yard. These are observations made by eyes that were physically present in that space on the night Nancy Guthrie disappeared. So now hold both of those facts in your mind at the same time. The person who wrote the ransom note had intimate, physical, first-hand knowledge of the inside of an American home. And that same person does not write in American English. They write like someone who learned the language from a textbook or a translation program. They write like someone whose brain operates in another tongue. Those two things should not exist in the same person. And yet they do, because both of them are in the same note, written by the same hand, sent to the same family. This is the intimacy paradox. And it is the single most unsettling detail in the entire Nancy Guthrie case. Someone knew Nancy's bedroom. Someone does not think in English. And the FBI has been unable to resolve that contradiction for 6 months. Let us walk through what this paradox could mean, because there are really only 3 possibilities, and each one changes the story completely. The first possibility is that the author is genuinely foreign and was physically present in the house. That means this is not a local crime. That means someone from outside the country, or at minimum outside the culture, entered Nancy Guthrie's home, took her, and wrote a ransom note in a language that is not their first one. That means the threat profile of this case is completely different from what anyone assumed. This is not a Tucson resident who snapped. This is not a neighbor with a grievance. This is an international operation, or at minimum, a cross-border crime. And if that is true, then the pool of suspects the FBI should be looking at is not in Arizona at all. It is somewhere else entirely. The second possibility is that the author is American and deliberately wrote in a non-native style to misdirect investigators. That means the USD and the buried in nature and the physical conditions are not accidents. They are performances. The author wanted the FBI to think the note was written by a foreigner. They wanted to send the investigation chasing after a phantom international kidnapper, while the real author, an American who knows the Guthrie home, sits quietly and watches. This would make the note one of the most sophisticated pieces of misdirection in a criminal case in years. Not just a fake ransom note with a fake accent. The third possibility is the most disturbing of all. The author is neither the kidnapper nor foreign. The author is someone with access to leaked crime scene information who used that information to construct a convincing ransom note for reasons that have nothing to do with actually collecting money. They took the details about the smartwatch and the floodlight from a source inside the investigation or from a report that should never have been shared. They wrote the note in a non-native style, either because they genuinely are not American or because they wanted to create distance between themselves and the crime. And they sent it to a family that was already drowning in grief and uncertainty, knowing it would generate false hope and public chaos. Each of these 3 possibilities leads to a completely different version of the Nancy Guthrie story. A foreign kidnapper, an American performing a foreign identity, an insider exploiting leaked information, and the FBI has not been able to determine which one is true. 6 months. The note arrived, the Bitcoin address was published. The FBI deposited a small amount of cryptocurrency into that address as a tracking measure, a way to see if anyone touched the wallet. Nobody touched it. The money sat there. Nobody came to collect. Nobody sent a follow-up message. Nobody checked whether the ransom had been paid. The communication channel that the note claimed would be closed was indeed closed, and it has stayed closed for half a year. If the author was foreign and present, they have vanished completely. No border records have surfaced, no international connections have been announced, no foreign law enforcement agency has been publicly linked to the investigation. If the author was American and performing, they have maintained perfect discipline. No slip in the performance, no second note that accidentally drops the accent, no leaked detail that betrays an American hand behind the foreign voice. If the author was an insider with leaked information, they have stayed hidden inside whatever system gave them access. No leak has been identified, no source has been exposed, no internal investigation has been publicly announced. All 3 possibilities remain alive. All 3 remain unconfirmed. And the note sits in the evidence file, carrying its paradox like a bomb that nobody knows how to defuse. Briana Whitney's observation about those 3 letters, USD, might turn out to be the most important detail in this entire case. Not because it solves anything, but because it narrows the field. It tells the FBI that whoever wrote this note is either not from here or is pretending not to be from here. It tells them that the author's relationship with the English language is not straightforward. It tells them that the person who knows what was on Nancy Guthrie's bedroom floor is not someone who writes the way Americans write. And it tells the rest of us something that is harder to sit with. The person who took Nancy Guthrie, or the person who pretended to take Nancy Guthrie, is someone who does not fit any of the profiles we have been taught to expect. They are not the obvious suspect. They are not the neighbor with the criminal record. They are not the disgruntled employee or the estranged relative. They are someone whose language betrays a different origin, whose knowledge betrays a physical presence, and whose silence betrays a purpose that none of us have figured out yet. Who knows what is inside your bedroom and does not think in your language? That question has been sitting in the Nancy Guthrie case for 6 months. The FBI has not answered it. The experts have not answered it. The family has not answered it. And every day that goes by without an answer, the paradox deepens. The foreign hand and the intimate knowledge, the translated phrases and the bedroom details, the 3 letters that an American would never write, and the 2 crime scene facts that only someone standing in that room could know. They are all in the same note, written by the same person, and that person is still out there, still silent, still carrying the answer to a question that nobody has been able to ask them directly. And here is something that makes the paradox even harder to resolve. The FBI has not publicly stated whether they have run a formal linguistic analysis on the notes. They have not said whether they consulted with language experts to determine the author's likely native tongue. They have not said whether the translation tool theory has been investigated by their digital forensics team. The silence from the Bureau on this specific question is notable, because if the FBI did run a linguistic profile and it pointed toward a non-native English speaker, that would narrow their suspect pool dramatically. It would eliminate every American-born suspect whose writing style matches standard American English. It would focus the investigation on people with international backgrounds, dual citizenship, recent immigration history, or connections to translation software. And if the FBI did run that analysis and it came back inconclusive, that would be almost as significant. It would mean the author's linguistic fingerprint is ambiguous enough to resist classification, which itself is a form of sophistication that most criminals do not possess. Either way, the USD detail is not going away. It is sitting in the evidence file like a splinter that cannot be removed. And every day that passes without an explanation for why a kidnapper in Arizona would specify an international currency code is a day that the paradox grows sharper and the pool of possible answers grows smaller. Until someone finds them, the paradox stays open. And an open paradox in a missing person case is not a puzzle. It is a wound that does not close.